working the night shift at a secluded rural medical facility. She was just another nurse, until the moment she placed her own body in the path of gunfire to shield an unknown wounded man. Her account met with skepticism from everyone. Yet her companion's investigation revealed an underground network of former service members, clandestine transport operations, and a moral code rarely seen by those outside their circle. What brought a dozen wordless men to stand guard at her hospital door? This is the account they attempted to eliminate but failed to suppress. Above Teresa Williams, the rural clinic's fluorescent bulbs blinked intermittently as she finished her shift, massaging her neck muscles while bidding farewell to the drowsy front desk worker. The clock showed almost 2 a.m., and beyond the parking area, an oppressive quiet seemed to press down like anticipation frozen in time. 28 years old, Teresa had become accustomed to the emptiness of these pre-dawn hours. Positioned behind a truck stop along an isolated highway stretch, the medical facility rarely handled anything more serious than minor injuries, fevers, or tired drivers seeking quick examinations between hauls. Draping her coat across her medical scrubs and pulling the hood against the encroaching mist, she ventured into the cold darkness. Her aging Corolla waited at the lot's distant edge. Beyond it lay the back route she traveled nightly, winding behind a series of abandoned storage buildings to cut 10 minutes from her drive home. The location carried a troubling reputation: poor illumination, unreliable cellular reception, a zone where truckers allegedly handled cargo that escaped official documentation. Teresa, however, didn't frighten easily. Exhaustion weighed on her, and her cat awaited feeding. Gravel crunched under her shoes as she moved quickly along the lot's perimeter and onto the narrow, fractured roadway. The warehouses rose to her left, their shapes consumed by fog. Her exhaled breath created clouds that merged with the distant rumble of an idling semi far off. Then came a noise, a heavy impact, a sudden groan, and metal clanging against pavement. Teresa halted. Her hand moved reflexively to her pocket, clutching her phone. She peered toward the space between two warehouses. The fog shifted and separated just enough to show a man stumbling from the darkness. He fell forward near the pavement's edge, his form motionless. Teresa remained still for one heartbeat before rushing forward. "Sir," she shouted, kneeling at his side. His coat was drenched, not merely from rain, but with something darker and more viscous: blood. The jacket appeared worn and damaged, with the left sleeve almost completely torn away. His face remained hidden, just disheveled dark hair and shaking hands gripping something wrapped in fabric inside his coat. "I work as a nurse," she said softly, uncertain whether he could hear her. "Everything will be fine. You're protected now. Just hold on." Her trembling fingers reached for her phone to dial emergency services. That's when the gunshot pierced the air. A single sharp crack, terrifyingly close. Something burning tore through her thigh's backside. Teresa cried out, falling beside the man. Agony shot through her entire body. Her phone slid across the pavement. She could see nothing, only swirling fog and the warehouse wall beside her. The shooter stayed invisible, though the man stirred slightly. His mouth moved, forming words she couldn't decipher. His hand, still pressed against that mysterious bundle on his chest, slowly extended toward her. She refused to let him perish. Despite her body's screaming protests, she dragged herself forward, using her own form as his shield. Another moment elapsed, then quiet returned. Whoever had fired had disappeared into the mist as suddenly as they'd emerged. When the ambulance finally arrived, summoned by a trucker who'd heard her scream, only Teresa remained, bleeding, trembling, and bewildered. The man had vanished. 2 hours afterward, Teresa occupied a hospital bed, her leg wrapped in bandages, her pain subdued by medication, yet her thoughts remained crystalline. "A man was there," she repeated for the 4th time to the deputy positioned near her bed's foot. "He'd been shot. He was hemorrhaging. I attempted to shield him. I was shot in the process." The deputy snapped his notebook shut. "We've examined the location. There's no blood trail, no indication of another person. The cameras weren't functioning. Your colleague mentioned your exhaustion. You might have experienced a hallucination. I'm a trauma nurse, she responded sharply. I don't hallucinate blood loss. He existed. Perhaps, he answered doubtfully, but lacking proof. Teresa remained awake long after their departure. Staring at the ceiling panels, her leg pulsed with pain. Her thoughts churned. Someone had been present. Someone facing danger. And now he'd disappeared, along with whatever he'd been safeguarding beneath that coat. The vision haunted her. That fabric bundle gripped so desperately. His partially formed words, the shot from within the fog. She understood what she'd witnessed. She knew she hadn't invented the pain, the terror, or the blood. Yet the world around her continued forward. No formal inquiry, no media coverage, merely silence. And somewhere beyond her reach, someone wished for her to cease inquiring. The hospital chamber smelled of cleaning solution and inexpensive vinyl, with walls the shade of dampened paper. Teresa sat upright gradually, grimacing as her sutures tugged against injured muscle. Her leg remained propped up, tightly wrapped and throbbing. The bullet had avoided the bone, though narrowly. The doctors claimed she was fortunate. She felt anything but fortunate. Her existence had contracted to the monitor's steady beeping, nurses' distant shuffling, and the gunshot's echo that continued reverberating in her recollection whenever silence fell in the room. The authorized version was straightforward. A solitary nurse wounded near a deserted warehouse. No surveillance footage, no perpetrators, no additional casualty. Investigation concluded. In this area, the mayor had earned notoriety for concealing violence beneath bureaucracy. Yet Teresa couldn't dismiss the sensation of the man's blood coating her hands, or how he'd clutched something against his chest as though it surpassed his life in importance. She attempted raising the subject again with hospital personnel, but they'd started regarding her as a trauma patient, compassionate yet patronizing. One nurse even gently inquired whether she'd previously experienced intense hallucinations. Teresa nearly hurled a bedpan at her. That afternoon, the door groaned open and a recognizable voice interrupted the pattern. "Tell me you struck someone." "Benny," she breathed out, smiling genuinely for the first time in days. Benny Alvarez, 32 years old, appeared in the entrance wearing a wrinkled hoodie and denim, gripping a styrofoam cup of convenience store coffee in one hand and a plastic sack of snacks in the other. His dark curls were pulled back, and his lanyard from the truck stop shop still dangled around his neck. "I wasn't certain which soup flavor you preferred, so I purchased 3, he explained, placing the bag on her bedside surface. "One contains broccoli, I believe. My apologies in advance." Teresa laughed and extended her hand to grasp his arm. "You weren't obligated to visit. You sustained a gunshot wound. T." Benny stated, his tone abruptly grave. "Of course I came." He settled into the plastic chair beside her, examining her expression. "Are you all right?" "Physically, I'll regain mobility. Mentally," she shook her head. "They believe I invented it. The person, the weapon, everything." Benny's brow furrowed. "Do you believe you invented it?" She fixed her gaze on him. "No. He was real, and someone desired his elimination." Benny reclined, chewing his lip. "What if this wasn't arbitrary? What if something larger is occurring here than we're meant to discover?" Over the following 2 days, Benny transformed into her solo investigative force. During his night shifts at the convenience store, he engaged truckers in conversation, particularly those arriving after midnight. He posed casual inquiries about the warehouse area, about highway troubles, about circulating rumors. Most dismissed him. One muttered something regarding ghost cargo before departing with a protein bar. Benny examined the gas station's surveillance recordings, hoping one might have captured Teresa's vehicle or the alley that evening, but the camera angle proved inadequate. Still, he persisted. Between shifts, he revisited the warehouse alley. The fog had cleared, replaced by intense sunlight and arid wind. No shell casings, no blood, merely oil marks, shattered glass, and quiet. He pursued an instinct and walked behind the clinic toward the staff entrance utilized during night shifts. That's when he discovered it. A small ripped paper fragment tucked just behind the doorframe's corner. It trembled slightly in the wind. Someone had secured it at eye level, obviously intended for discovery. Benny removed it and examined the message scrawled in rushed, irregular ink. The convoy is safe because of her. He kept it secret initially. He walked directly into the hospital through the main entrance this time and ascended to Teresa's floor. As he rounded the final corner, he stopped. A man in work boots and a camouflage jacket leaned against the wall just beyond her room, arms folded, gazing out the window. Another man, older with a graying crew cut, stood at the vending machine, not even feigning interest in selecting a snack. His forearms were visible, and Benny observed the ink on both. Faded Marine Corps tattoos. They didn't resemble hospital staff. They didn't even resemble truckers. They looked like individuals who'd witnessed too much and spoken too little. Benny slipped past them and entered Teresa's room. "You won't believe this," he said, displaying the paper. She read it twice, her complexion paling. "That's not coincidental. There's additional information," Benny added quietly. "There are men stationed outside your room, military types. They're not attempting to be obvious, but they're monitoring." "Monitoring me? I believe they're safeguarding you." Later that evening, just after visiting hours concluded, the door creaked open once more. A man entered, middle-aged, perhaps in his 50s, with a weathered beard, grease-marked mechanic's uniform, and an uneven gait. He didn't provide an introduction. He didn't request permission. He simply approached close to Teresa's bedside, leaned in, and in a hushed voice stated, "He's alive." The cargo arrived at its destination. Then, just as abruptly, he pivoted and exited. Teresa stared at the vacant doorway, her heart pounding in her chest. "Did you hear that?" she asked Benny, who'd just returned with tea. "Hear what?" She recounted every word. Benny didn't laugh, didn't question. He sat down slowly and studied the note again. "Tea," he said, voice unwavering. "I believe we've just landed in the center of something far larger than we comprehend." She nodded, her pulse still accelerating. The hospital room felt transformed now, not like a healing space, but like the tranquil center of a tempest. "He's alive." The cargo arrived at its destination. Someone beyond her view was manipulating events. Someone recognized what she had accomplished, and they wouldn't dismiss it. Benny sat in his vehicle just outside a weather-beaten structure. The sign overhead read, "Rusty Boots Veterans Bar and Grill." Only 3 vehicles occupied the lot. All pickup trucks, all covered in a fine dust layer that he'd passed the establishment for years but had never once entered. He glanced down at the paper in his grasp, the identical note that had been secured behind the hospital staff door. He didn't know what he anticipated finding here, just an instinct, a thread he couldn't cease pulling. Inside, the establishment smelled of wood treatment, aged grease, and whiskey. The lighting was subdued, the voices hushed. On the walls, military patches and monochrome photographs gazed down like silent sentries. Several older men sat dispersed across booths and bar stools, nursing beverages, watching a muted television that flickered with a football game nobody attended to. Benny approached the bar where a gruff man with a white beard and substantial forearms wiped down a glass with a cloth that appeared older than the jukebox. "Searching for someone?" the man inquired, not glancing up. "Not precisely. I'm seeking answers." That earned him a look. "We provide beer and silence. Answers cost extra." Benny hesitated, then extracted the note from his pocket and slid it across the bar. The man read it. His expression remained unchanged, but he ceased wiping. After a pause, he gestured toward a booth at the rear where a man sat alone with a card deck, arranging them face down like an unfinished game. "Speak with Curtis." Curtis looked up gradually when Benny approached. Late 60s, slender but not weak, with silver hair and eyes like glass spheres. Transparent, inscrutable. "You're not military," he stated. "No," Benny conceded, sliding into the booth. "But my companion." She sustained a gunshot wound assisting someone who was. "I believe you possess knowledge about what's occurring." Curtis studied him extensively. Then he reached over, flipped a card, Queen of Spades. "You don't pose questions like that unless you've already witnessed something. So I'll state this once." He leaned forward. "You ever hear of the freedom convoys?" Benny shook his head negatively. Not the demonstrations, not those in the media. I'm discussing something older, more discreet. A handful of men. Marines, Rangers, drivers who returned from war and discovered a different kind of battlefield awaiting. Bureaucrats, contractors, private firms exploiting our own. Hooking veterans into predatory employment, fraudulent benefits, compulsory labor beneath the radar. Guys in debt, injured, instructed to remain silent and continue hauling. A chill crept down Benny's spine. So several of us decided to retaliate, off the grid. When a vet possessed evidence, documents, recordings, sometimes even someone seeking escape, we transported them quietly, securely. No trails, no cell towers, merely engines and confidence. Curtis took a prolonged sip from his glass. The man your companion rescued wasn't merely a Marine. That was a courier. He was transporting a ledger, names, dates, shell company addresses, the sort of material people disappear over. And she positioned herself between him and a bullet. Benny swallowed hard. Why didn't anyone notify the police or the press? Because then the mission's compromised. The operation terminates. The individuals behind it eliminate evidence and retreat deeper underground. Your companion preserved the mission. And because of that, those who exploit their own will face exposure. Curtis slid the Queen of Spades toward him. But the world doesn't receive notification about heroes like her. Not in headlines. Only here. He tapped his chest. And here. He tapped the card. That evening, the sky transformed to an oily gray as a summer storm approached. Thunder rumbled low like distant artillery as Teresa lay in her hospital bed, observing raindrops trace down the window glass. Her leg ached less now. The staff still offered kind smiles, but a different energy permeated the air lately. Strange visitors passing by, too many expressionless faces that didn't belong to patients. She knew Benny had discovered something, but even he hadn't prepared her for what transpired next. A firm knock, then the door opened. The man who entered moved with intention. Despite his worn boots and time-lined expression, square shoulders, steel gray hair trimmed short, a long tan coat with a Marine Corps pin on the collar. "Miss Williams," he stated. "I'm Colonel Briggs." His presence saturated the room like a sudden pressure shift. Teresa straightened, heart racing. "You're military, retired, and unofficial in this capacity." He walked to her bed's foot. "You performed something no one anticipated that night. You made a decision in a fraction of a second, and you preserved more lives than you'll ever comprehend." She stared at him. "The man I assisted, he was part of something. Something dangerous." Colonel Briggs nodded. He was transporting critical evidence to expose a smuggling network targeting veterans. Fraudulent benefit programs, black market labor, coercion. This has been occurring under everyone's perception for years. The information he carried sufficient to expose it completely. But those operating it possess power, finances, and no moral compass. They were willing to kill to keep it concealed. "And the cargo?" she inquired. "What was it?" "A sealed file," he explained, "with names, locations, and a testimony from someone who survived their system. And he's alive. He is. Thanks to you, the mission wasn't compromised. But we couldn't publicize it. Too many risks. Lives remain endangered." Teresa nodded slowly, absorbing everything. Colonel Briggs stepped forward and positioned a small item on her bedside table. A dark cloth patch stitched in faded gold thread, depicting a winged wheel, a rifle, and below it a single phrase, "Semper Fi." "Those who know the truth won't forget what you accomplished," he said. "And those who don't need to." Then, with a quiet nod, he departed. When the door clicked shut, Teresa sat in silence. Outside, the storm intensified, rain hammering the windows. She turned the patch over in her hands, the threads rough against her fingers. She thought of the man in the warehouse, of the bullet, of the eyes watching her now. Not with suspicion, but with unspoken gratitude. Whatever conflict had entered her life, she hadn't fled from it. She had stepped forward, and someone had been saved. The morning Teresa was released, the sky hung low with thick, gray clouds. the kind of morning that feels like the world is suspended in anticipation. She stood at the clinic entrance, a paper bag of possessions tucked under one arm, the other gripping a simple metal cane. Her left leg, though stronger now, still trembled with each step. Benny walked beside her, unusually silent. He carried her duffel and glanced over his shoulder once, as if sensing something he couldn't articulate. The staff had offered their courteous farewells. Smiles, nods, a signature here and there, but beneath their professionalism, Teresa still sensed the chill of disbelief in their eyes, the unspoken doubt that had pursued her since that first night. She didn't blame them anymore. Some truths simply weren't meant for official records. She stepped outside and froze. Arranged in absolute silence across the far end of the clinic parking lot were 12 trucks. Full-sized rigs, long haulers, weathered and proud, positioned with military precision. Each one was different colors, different makes, but they stood as one, shoulder to shoulder like soldiers on a final watch. And before each truck stood a man. 12 of them at attention, wearing jeans, work boots, flannel, and canvas jackets. To a stranger, they looked like any other truckers. But to Teresa, there was no mistaking it. Their posture, their bearing, their silence. The tattoos on their arms peeking out from rolled sleeves. Unit numbers, flags, marine insignias, some so faded they looked like ghosts from another era. The wind stirred, catching the loose hem of her coat. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Benny whispered, "Teresa." The driver from the center truck stepped forward, broad shoulders, hard jaw, a clean-shaven face with storm-gray eyes. Sergeant stripes inked on his forearm, old but sharp. His work shirt was buttoned to the collar, grease-stained at the sleeves. He stopped a few feet from her, said nothing at first, then with a firm but quiet voice, "You didn't just save a man. You kept our brother's sacrifices from being dishonored." She tried to speak, but nothing emerged, only the sound of distant wind and the quiet idling of a diesel engine. Behind Sergeant Cole, the 12 men raised their hands, not in a dramatic salute, but a quiet one. Low, steady, eyes fixed on her. It lasted only a moment, and then without a word, they turned as one, climbed into their trucks, and one by one started their engines. The deep hum of diesel filled the air like a heartbeat returning to the earth. No sirens, no applause, just the sound of 12 rigs rolling out of the lot and disappearing down the highway. Later, as Teresa sat with Benny on a bench near the edge of the clinic's lawn, she still held the patch Colonel Briggs had given her. She traced the threads with her fingers gently, like a child afraid of breaking something sacred. Benny looked over. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. "My dad used to say something." Benny waited. "Courage hides in plain sight." He nodded. "Feels like that's exactly what just happened." Neither of them said anything for a while. No one else had seen what they saw. The nurses had returned to their rounds. A couple of orderlies were on break, smoking and laughing by the loading dock, unaware of the honor guard that had just come and gone like a passing storm, and no camera caught it. No headlines would cover it. But Teresa didn't need that. The man she helped was alive. The cargo had made it. And now she knew. Sometimes the people who protect the world the most are the ones it never sees. She looked down at the patch again. "Semper Fi," she whispered, not as a veteran or as a soldier, but as someone who had stood up when it mattered most, and had been quietly, permanently welcomed into a brotherhood she would never fully understand, but would always respect, and for her, that was enough. This story reminds us that genuine courage doesn't require a uniform. It acts when nobody's observing. If you were Teresa, would you have stopped to assist a stranger that night? Tell us in the comments. Where are you watching us from? If this story moved you, please leave it a like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more powerful tales of quiet heroes. See you in the next video.